Now that you understand how to write the slope of a line, let's take a look at how you would write the equation of a line. And I'm going to show you three separate cases, starting with the easiest case to one it's not harder, it just requires a little bit more work. So recall that the general formula for a line is always written as sum y equals mx plus b. So this is the equation of a line that's written in slope-intercept form, because when it's written in this form, we can very easily identify the slope of the line, and we can easily identify the y-intercept of the line. So when you are writing the equation of a line, if you are given the slope and the y-intercept, that's the first case. That's your easiest scenario, because if you have a slope and you have the initial value, then all you have to do is plug it into the equation. So for example, if I gave you a line as a graph, let's say I give you that line right there, and I tell you that its y-intercept is 0, 3, and I tell you that this line has a slope of 2, then to write the equation of this line, you would just plug in 2 for m, and we know it's positive because that line is increasing, and when you would plug in 3 for b, and you have just written the equation of that line. So that's easy when you know the slope and you know the y-intercept. That's case 1. We're going to take a look at case 2, where the slope is given to us and 1 point is given to us, but we don't actually know what the y-intercept is. So that's case 2. And then your third case, which I'll save for another video, would be when you don't have the slope, you don't have the points given to you directly as an ordered pair, and we might not have the y-intercept. So let's begin with case 1. Let's take a look at this example, and this example is actually from chapter 1. You've seen this example before, and you also saw it again in chapter 2. We're told that the total cost, C, for a manufacturer during a given period is a function of the number n of items produced during that period. We know that total cost involves two things: fixed costs, which doesn't change no matter how much n changes by, and variable costs, which does change. So suppose the manufacturer of widgets has fixed costs of $1,500 per month, and that the variable cost is $20 per widget. So we want to come up with some formula for C as a function of n, where C stands for total cost. So if C stands for total cost, and we know that total cost involves variable cost plus fixed cost, our variable cost changes by $20 for every widget that we produce, and our fixed cost is $1,500. So notice that you've just written the equation of this linear function where you know what the slope is. So the slope in this problem tells us how much total cost increases by for every additional item that's being produced. So that's your slope. And the fixed cost, that's your y-intercept. The y-intercept in this problem, remember we could write it as an ordered pair, is some 0, 1,500. And in this problem, the x value represents n and the y value represents c. So this tells us that our cost is $1,500 even if we don't produce any items. So that's the first case. Let's take a look at case 2. In this problem here, we're told, so we're still talking about total cost. So total cost is still a function of the number of items being produced. And we're told here that total cost, again, involves two things. We have variable cost and fixed cost. Now the difference between this problem and the previous problem is here we're told that the manufacturer has a variable cost of $20 per widget. So we know that this is 20 per n, right? And that 30 widgets are produced when the total cost is $2,100. So notice in this problem, we don't know what the fixed cost is, which means we do not know what the y-intercept is. But we are given a data point. So I'm going to write down that data point. I'm going to write it in terms of some xy, which in this problem, x is n and y is c. So we're told that 30 widgets are produced. When 30 widgets are produced, the cost is $2,100. So that is the ordered pair 30, comma, 2,100, where 30 is n and 2,100 is c. So notice I have a point and I also have my slope. So I'm going to write all that information down. I'm going to write down everything that I have. I have my point, 30, comma, 2,100, and I have my slope, which is 20. So to write the equation, I need to, remember the equation is some y equals mx plus b, right? I need to put these together. So what you're going to do, there are two ways of solving this. So let me draw a line here. I'm going to show you two ways. The first way of solving this is to use the slope-intercept form of the equation. So you can use the slope-intercept formula to find the equation. Or the other method is to use the point-slope formula. I'm going to show you both methods and you'll see that you'll get the same answer. So which method you use really just depends on what you feel comfortable with. So let's start with the slope-intercept form. To use the slope-intercept form, we just write down the general equation in slope-intercept form. And what you're going to do now is you're going to take all of the information that was given to you over here and you're going to substitute it in. So we're going to substitute in this information into this equation here. And notice that we don't know b, so we're going to try and solve for b. But we do know what m is, so let's go ahead and write that down. And we also know what our x and y is. So when x is 30, y is 2,100. And oops, let me go ahead and replace my m. We know what that is, so let me write that in. That is 20. Okay, we don't know what b is, so just write b, and now you see you have an equation where you can solve for b. So let's do that. 2,100, this gives us 600 plus b. Now, what are you going to do to get b? So we're going to subtract 600 from both sides. So we get 2,100 minus 600. And b is 1,500, or 1,500. So now that you have b, your last step is to put it all together. So now to write the equation, y is equal to 20x plus 1,500. But you want to make sure that you use the variables for this problem. So y is c and x is n. So notice that we were still able to come up with the equation of this line even though we were not given the y-intercept directly. Okay, most students like using this method on the left, but some students like using the point-slope formula. I personally like to use the point-slope formula myself, but to use the point-slope formula, you got to make sure you understand how the formula is written. So the point-slope formula actually comes from the formula for calculating slope. And so we write it as y minus y sub 1 is equal to m times x minus x sub 1, where x sub 1 and y sub 1 is the point that you're given. So in this particular problem, the point that we're given is 30, 2,100. So that's my x sub 1 and my y sub 1. And we know what m is. M is 20. So just like before, we're going to just substitute in everything that we have. So y is just y. Y sub 1 we know is 2,100. M is 20. X is just x. And x sub 1 is 30. So now we're going to distribute this 20 to everything inside the parentheses. So we get 20x minus 600, and then our last step here is to add 2,100 to both sides, and that cancels out. And so we get y is equal to 20x plus 1,500, and then now let's rewrite it using the correct variables. So hopefully you can see that we got the same answer, okay? I personally like using this method because when I use this method, I end up with the equation at the end. The reason why I usually don't use this method here is because I get so excited that I found B when I substitute everything in that I actually end up forgetting to answer the question and going back and putting everything together to write the equation. So it's completely up to you which method you want to use. In the next video, I'll go over the last case, case 3. In the last video, you wrote the equation of a line given 2 different cases. So the first case was when you were given the slope and the y-intercept, and then the second case was when you were given the slope, but you were not given the y-intercept. Instead, you were given just another point on the line. So now we're going to take a look at case 3, and in this case, we don't have the slope, and we also do not have the y-intercept. So even though we're given 2 data points, I'm going to write them as some x sub 1 comma y sub 1 and some x sub 2 comma y sub 2. We're going to be given 2 points, but neither of those points is the y-intercept. So this is the same example as the last video, but we're just given different information. So let's begin. We're told that the total cost for manufacturing during a given period, we're calling that C, is a function of the number of items, and we're calling that N, being produced during that period. We're told that the total cost involves 2 things, fixed costs and variable costs. So if C is total cost, so this is total cost, we know that it involves variable costs. So to find our total cost, we take our variable costs and we add our fixed costs. Okay, now it says, suppose that the total cost is $2,100 when 30 widgets are produced, and that the total cost is $3,500 when 100 widgets are produced. So what I typically tell my students to do is whenever they have a problem like this, they want to go ahead and write down their ordered pair, but using the variables that are given in this particular problem. So in this problem, our ordered pair, instead of using x comma y, is going to be n comma c. Okay, so just like up here, when we wrote the points as x comma y, we're going to write our points, but we're going to write it as n. So you can think of it as n sub 1 and c sub 1. And then our second point, let's call that n sub 2 and c sub 2. Now, fill in all of the information that you're given. So in this problem, we're told that total cost is $2,100 when 30 widgets are produced. So there's your first point. Your first point is 30, comma, 2,100. And our second point, we're told that total cost is $3,500 when 100 widgets are produced. So there is our second point. And now I want you to take a look at these 2 points and notice that we do not have the y-intercept. So how do I know that I don't have the y-intercept? I know I don't have the y-intercept because my x, quote unquote, my x value, right, is not 0. So notice we have 30 and 100, but we were not given a point where that value was 0 comma some number b. And remember, this is your y-intercept. So we don't have that point. Okay, so what do we do when we don't have our y-intercept, don't know what this is, and we also don't know what our slope is? We have no idea what m is. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do in a situation like this, before we can write the equation, and remember the equation is we're looking for some y equals mx plus b, is I have to find the slope. So that's your first step. Let me move this up. So our first step is to calculate the slope. Let's go ahead and do that. First step, calculate the slope. So you have to remind yourself the equation for a slope is some y sub 2 minus y sub 1 divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. But in this particular problem, let's go ahead and convert it to our c sub 2 minus c sub 1. So use your c variable, and n sub 2 minus n sub 1, because remember, c is your y and n is like your x, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and fill that information in. And notice that you've written it up here. So you know that this is c sub 2. Let me erase these. Oh, okay, and then this is x, oops, this is n sub 2, and this is c sub 1, and this is x, I keep writing x, n sub 1. Okay, let's fill everything in. So then that's 3,500 minus 2,100. Divide that by 100 minus 30. Okay, so on the top here, we've got 3,500 minus 2,100, which gives us 1,400. And on the bottom, we have 70. And let's divide 1,400 by 70, and our slope is 20. So now we know what our slope is. Once you have your slope, your second step is to pick one of your 2 points. So pick one point, and then you're either going to use the slope-intercept formula, to find B, or you're going to use the point slope formula to find B. And remember, B is our y-intercept. Okay, so we're going to pick one point, and we're going to use either the slope-intercept formula or the point slope formula to get B. And our goal is to find the y-intercept. Okay, let me scoot this up. And again, just like in the last video, I'm going to use both methods, and then you can decide which method you like to use. So we'll use on the left here the slope-intercept form, and on the right here, I'll show you how to use the point slope formula. Okay. So let's write down the slope-intercept formula. Y equals mx plus b. Okay, and let's substitute in what we have. So pick one point. So we have 2 points. Let me go back down here, take a look at our 2 points, and you decide which point you want to use. You can either use this first point here, or you can use the second point here. And it turns out that it doesn't matter which point you use, because if both of these points are on that line, then it shouldn't matter which one you use to write the equation of that line. So for right now, I'm going to just choose this second point here. So I'm going to choose the point. I'm going to choose the point 100, comma, I already forgot what it was, 100, comma, 3,500. Okay. And then I'm going to also write down my slope, which remember we found in the first step, which was 20. And then now let's just plug everything in. So y is still y, m is 20, x, so in this particular problem, think of that as your x, that's your y. So when x is 100, y is 3,500. And we don't know what b is, but that's what we're going to solve for. So we have 3,500 is equal to 2,000 plus b, and then now we're going to subtract 2,000 from both sides. That cancels out, and we've got 3,500 minus 2,000, which gives us 1,500, and there is your b. But don't forget, you have to actually write the equation. So now that is y is equal to 20x plus 1,500, and then again you want to rewrite this using the variables given to us in the problem. So that's going to be 20 equals 20, or excuse me, c equals 20n plus 1,500. Okay, now if you want to use the point slope formula, remember that formula is y minus y sub 1 is equal to m times the quantity x minus x sub 1, and we can use the same point. I'm going to pick the point 100, comma 3,500, okay, and then our slope of 20, and this time just do the same substitutions, except this is now x sub 1, this is y sub 1, and you want to write that down just so that you make sure that you plug it into the equation correctly. So this is going to be y minus 3,500 is equal to 20 times x minus 100. Now we're going to distribute that 20 to every term inside the parentheses. So that gives us 20x minus 2,000. And then now we're going to add 3,500 to both sides to get y by itself on the left. And notice that you get the same exact equation. And again, don't forget to convert this using, not convert, but make sure that you replace the y and the x with the variables given to you in the problem. Okay, so that's how you would go about writing the equation of a line when you have 2 points and neither of those points is the y-intercept. So it's just 2 steps. Find the slope and then pick a point and then use either the slope-intercept formula or the point-slope formula to come up with the actual equation of that line.